Hey people, I'm ZSH Plays. Today we're going to be building the Blackburn Pavilion at London Zoo. So if you're wondering what that is, the Blackburn Pavilion is a beautiful tropical birdhouse that was built back in 1883 and is still there now. It's one of my favourite zoo buildings, I think. It is really beautiful and it was restored to its former glory recently. Apparently it was originally a reptile house when it was built, but I think fairly soon after that it was converted to hold tropical birds, and it's been holding them ever since. And then back in 2008 it was renovated. I think it was just called the Birdhouse before, but it was renovated and renamed the Blackburn Pavilion, I think after whoever donated the money to have it renovated. So these days the outside is as beautiful as it always has been, but inside it's now, rather than millions and millions of tiny little cages for little birds, there's now a beautiful entrance hall with some smaller birds in it, and then the entire rest of the building is one giant habitat where all the birds are free flying. So you just walk along a path through this little indoor forest, all the birds fly around you, and then there's loads of off-show areas for the birds to breed. Bit of a backstory to this video. So I actually originally built this for my London Zoo 1985 project. This building is actually the reason that this channel exists. So I spent months researching and building London Zoo as it stood in the 1980s, and this building was the last of the major buildings in the zoo that I built, and with it being the last one and with it being one of my favourites, I decided I wanted to sort of commemorate that building by doing my first ever speed build video. So the first video I ever uploaded to this channel was a speed build of the old version of this building. It is literally 25 minutes of raw speed build footage, no cinematics, no voiceover, no nothing. But it always annoyed me that one of my favourite builds had a really poor video for it, and I thought what would be a really good idea would be to update the building to how it looks now and then do this new video. So I'm using the classic set of pieces here for most of the building, which is absolutely perfect for the Victorian architecture in London Zoo, and then various other pieces for detailing like these window ledges and the plaster panels across the top, etc. This building on its own actually sort of is a microcosm of the history of zoos when you look at the purposes that this building has had. So when it opened nearly 200 years ago, it would have been absolutely packed to the gills with reptiles in, you know, tiny little cages, numerous crocodiles around one tiny little brick pond, etc. And it wasn't long before that was converted to house tropical birds instead, which tend to be a lot smaller. But there were literally hundreds of species of them in this one building. So again, they would have just been in tiny little cages like people keep parakeets in their houses. And then these days, with the same amount of space inside and outside the building, there's probably only around 10 species in here now. They have so much room. If you ever get to go to London Zoo, I'd highly recommend visiting the Blackburn Pavilion. It is beautiful inside as well as outside, and the walkthrough experience with the birds is great. Sometimes they will get really, really close to you and they'll just chill out on the path next to you or land on the railings. It's a really fun experience to go and visit. Now, unfortunately, unlike London Zoo in the 19th century, I do not have hundreds of species of birds to put in here. I have 0. So hopefully that will change with the news that Planet Zoo will be getting updates for at least another year, and the fact that they now have proper flying reptiles in Jurassic World Evolution 2. I am fairly confident that we will receive update with proper flying birds in it to Planet Zoo at some point this year. I don't have any inside information, so don't quote me on that, but that is certainly what I'm hoping. And if they do, then this is one of the many aviaries in London Zoo that I'll be revisiting and filling with birds. What I'm building here is I think it was the original sign for the front of the birdhouse. It has the old name and it commemorates the year that it was built, which I managed to get wrong when I put this sign in. I had to go back and fix that. It should be 1883. But this has been moved to the side of the building now, more as a sort of commemoration of when the building was built. And there is a new sign for the Blackburn Pavilion on the front, which I'll be building in a minute. What I'm doing here is putting in where the external aviaries are. Back in April last year, I think it was, I built the aviaries outside as they stood back in the 1980s. But what I'm doing today is rebuilding them as they are now, much bigger and much more modern to hold birds in a much better fashion. We will get in and put those in a minute, and we'll move on and take care of the roof, which has got some really interesting stuff going on it. This was a real challenge to build. By the way, if you're one of my amazing subscribers and you're wondering why we're not building in Tecton Zoo this week, the reason for it, and I mentioned this in the previous Tecton episode, I think, or certainly one of the recent ones, is that the remaining builds in Tecton Zoo are pretty complex, pretty big, and getting them done once a week is not going to happen. They need a lot of work. The nocturnal house, which will be coming up next, is going to be pretty massive, and that'll only be the second nocturnal house I've ever built. I built one here in London Zoo. That was a very small nocturnal house and definitely a learning curve for me, and I've learned a lot more about how to build them since then. So that build is going to take quite a while to get together, and then we've got all sorts of other fiendishly complicated, by my standards anyway, builds to come. So there's no way I'm going to be able to get those out once a week. So I am going to be doing some smaller builds as well, so that we've still got some videos to watch. They just won't always be in Tecton Zoo, but I really hope you're enjoying seeing a building that isn't in Tecton Zoo. So let me know in the comments what you think, and if you're enjoying this, hopefully you are. I think the next Tecton Zoo episode will potentially be out next week, if not the week after. We'll have to see how I get along. Back to this build, these details like the plaster ledge that runs all the way around the top of the building are really important to make it look realistic. It's a bit of a pain lining it all up exactly with the pieces, especially on these diagonal corners here, but it's really worth it. It looks much better with this on there. Plus this is what is there in real life, so it needs to go on there if I'm going to be happy with it. Sometimes you have to use a smaller piece like this to join up the gaps and then go back and move all the ones you've already placed, but the end result looks really good, and I was really happy with that part of the build. This is the external aviaries, so we're going to do some work here now. I've raised the terrain inside the aviary part of it so that the birds would be more of an eye level with the guests, and I'm going to put some perches in for the birds and a load more vegetation. You can see the old aviaries in this part of the speed build. In a couple of minutes we'll go in, remove those and replace them with the new aviaries that they have there now, that are much bigger and a lot less square. Moving on to the inside of the building, this is one of my favourite parts of the build. This is the first interior I ever made that I was happy with. In fact, I was so happy with it, I've barely changed it in this new version. It just captures that Victorian feel really well. So what the zoo did with the inside is they kept all the architecture that was in there and the colour scheme. It was all repainted, the original colours, and restored, so it looked immaculate. And then they just took out the separators inside the cages. So instead of having this iron or steel or whatever it is cage split into 10 different tiny cages for birds, it would just be one big cage with a few birds in it. And then I'm just using some of the in-game bird related pieces to decorate the place. Some of this art is really good. It's some of the best art in the game. The cassowary and the peacock poster, I'm a big fan of them, so I was happy to use those rather than create something myself. I really love this path as well. Not something that I really get to use in Tecton. It doesn't really fit, but it's a really nice path that Frontier have created there. It's a lot of fun being able to build all this Victorian stuff for a change. This area that we're working on is the entrance hall, which is still there now, and this passageway here leads through to the walkthrough part of the habitat that we won't be building today, but hopefully we will do one day when Frontier add birds. Come on guys, you know you want to. A few more touch-ups on the inside here, and then we're going to start working on the actual cages for the birds themselves. So I've put like a false bottom in with mulch, and then we'll put loads of perches and foliage on the inside for the birds. And then there's, I presume this wasn't there back in the 80s, but it certainly is now. There's loads of foliage on the outside of the cage, which I think looks really nice, complements the foliage on the inside. And like I say, they are really tiny birds in here, so they have more room than it looks in this speed build. And then we'll just do something similar on the other side, but different, so they don't look identical. Add the ceiling in to the hallway, and then we are almost done with the inside of this building. There's just one more thing to do. Now, inside the Blackburn Pavilion, London Zoo actually have a little display cart, very similar to the one that we have in Planet Zoo, with tropical bird eggs in it. And that was one of the things that actually reminded me about this build and inspired me to go back to it, was when Frontier introduced actual bird eggs in the last update. I can finally get rid of the little primitive shape I sunk into the bottom of this cart in an attempt to make it look like an egg. It looks a lot better with the new ones, I can tell you that. And now we're going to move on to today's building work and bring this enclosure right up to date. So the old aviaries are going to be removed and replaced with new ones, which are bigger and much more modern. I think I built the old ones larger than they were in real life, and they're also split into loads of different enclosures inside. These new ones are a much more modern mesh design, and they're going to be sort of one big aviary per species rather than split into loads of different ones. So this is all going to be built with the mesh pieces, which has got to be one of the hardest things to do in this game, or it is for me anyway. They're so hard to see when you're working with them. You move the camera to a certain angle and they literally disappear. Trying to get them to line up when you're building anything that isn't just a box is really difficult. So this took a long time for me to get right. I've seen some absolutely incredible aviaries made with this. A creator called Haribo has made some incredible ones on the workshop, which I've used before. I'd highly recommend downloading those if you can't face the chore of trying to make one yourself. But for this one, I wanted it to be a particular shape, so I actually built this one myself from scratch and just used all the little pieces as well as the larger ones to get everything lined up and make it match the building in real life. This is the start of it. We've got these poles and then the mesh is suspended from those, so it's a much more interesting shape than it used to be, and like I say, loads more room for the birds as well. I'm really happy with how these turned out. Let's move on and take a look at one of the other new aspects of this building. Alright, so one of the new features on the building since it's been refurbished is a new sign. Because it's quite a long name, the letters, which are made of metal and suspended above the entrance, are pretty small. So I've used a custom font for this, and this font is made by the wonderful Ricey. If you've not seen her work, check her workshop out, RYCIE. She has made some amazing fonts, and they are absolutely invaluable for making stuff like this. And I'm using one of my favourite new pieces, which is the hinge bracket, I think it's called, or maybe it's just called hinge, from the new Europe pack, which is one of the smallest pieces in the game and is absolutely perfect for putting that sign up there, and it's looking pretty nice. And you saw me create a fake egg earlier. I've now replaced that with a selection of the new eggs from the Europe pack, which looks so much better, which is nice. And the final part of this build is the clock statue that sits outside the entrance now. So this is one of the things that was added in 2008. It's a big art piece, sort of statue meets mechanical contraption meets clock meets bird display. And I'm going to be brutally honest, I haven't quite done it justice here. I don't have the pieces or the skill, really, to replicate this exactly. But I've done my best. I'm using some of Drac's workshop item Toucans here as well. I'm going to get this as close as possible to the art piece as it is in real life. And that is the Blackburn Pavilion built. So thank you so much for watching as always. Let me know in the comments what you think of it. And I will see you very soon for some more Planet Zoo. Thanks for watching.